Second City by D.school. And if you want, you can download slides. There's fewer slides today than usual, but if you want to go to the bit.ly link, Stanford MOC5, you can zoom ahead, as we often joke, if you get bored and you want to see what slides are coming up by the end of the talk. It's my distinct pleasure to get to introduce our two guest speakers. We've got Kelly Leonard, who's the executive director of Second City. He's also the author of this fantastic book called Yes and. I highly recommend it. And Piero Procaccini, who's the director of Improv at Second City. And they are going to immerse us in some of the fundamental techniques of the improviser's mindset, which probably, if you're here on this session with us, is no news to you. But it's not just about creating comedy. It's also about divergent thinking, about exploring possibilities, about collaborative idea generation. And Piero and Kelly are world-renowned experts in the subject. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce them. And I would like to hand over the floor to my friend, Kelly Leonard.
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here with you. I'm going to start with a story. So it's about 15 years ago, and I'm in my office at the Second City, and it's a Friday late in the day, and I'm packing up my stuff. And my son, Nick, who's 10 at the time, is completing his first week of improv classes. And here's what you need to know about Nick at that time. In addition to being 10 years old, he's chubby, he's got weird theater parents, so he's kind of a weird theater kid, and he gets bullied at school. But this week has been amazing. And we get in the car and we're leaving Second City garage. And he says to me, "Dad, do you know what I love about improv classes?" And I go, "No, buddy, what do you love about improv classes?" He goes, "In improv, if you're nice and you're funny, you're popular." That has stuck with me to this day, because that's the world I want to live in. So I started at Second City in 1988, and my first gig out of college was as a dishwasher, which is not as glamorous as it sounds. The back bar in those days was filled with alcoholics and sociopaths. I am not making that up. Fun note, the other guy who got hired as a dishwasher that week was Jon Favreau, the film director, and we both had mullets. There is photographic evidence of both those things. My wife has a picture in her office of both of us with our mullets. And even though the job was terrible at that point, the cool thing was you got to step out and watch the show. And I don't know if you know how Second City is set up, but we do 2 acts of scripted content and then a 3rd act that is improvised, that is completely made up. And it feels like magic. And I should note at the time that in '88, on the resident stages at Second City included Mike Myers and Bonnie Hunt. Jane Lynch was in our Second City ETC cast. Chris Farley had just been hired in the touring company and was constantly getting in trouble for breaking things. And he would do the improv set, and that means it was just like a ball of energy. So it feels like magic. But then you work here a while and you start to understand the undergirdings of improvisation, and it's not magic at all. Improv is yoga for your social skills. Improv is loud, noisy group mindfulness. Improvisation is a practice in being unpracticed, which is how we walk through the world every single day. If it surprises you to hear that, it might not if you knew the origin stories of this work, because it starts in the 20s and 30s with a woman named Viola Spolin, who was a social worker working at Jane Addams' Hull House on the south side of Chicago. And her job was to better assimilate the immigrant children coming into her care. And so she created these exercises, these games that allowed them to communicate and collaborate and empathize. A lot of these games were in gibberish or silence because the kids didn't always share language. They came from all over the world. Viola's son, Paul Sills, was studying at the University of Chicago. He loved these games. He taught them to his friends, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Alan Arkin, among others. And they formed the first improvisational theater in America in 1957 called the Compass Players, pure improvisation. That morphs into the Second City, which uses improvisation to then create finely honed sketches in 1959. All right, so flash forward to 1992, and I become the producer of Second City. Far too young, I was 26, I had no reason getting the job other than, I don't know, long story, but I become the producer of Second City. And I start to really get into the bones of the work. And I was very blessed because I was able to, in my first hiring session, I hired Tina Fey, Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, not all at the same audition, but in the first few years, then worked with people and hired people like Amber Ruffin and Jason Sudeikis, and the list goes on and on. The 90s and the aughts were incredible. Flash forward to 2015, that's when I write the book, Yes And. So I actually went on book tour. And here's the thing about when you go on book tour, when you could go on book tours. And any author who tells you they don't do this is lying. You always go into the local bookstore and look to see if your book is there. And since I wrote a business book, I'd be looking in that business section. And so I go and see if that's there, and then I'd see what else is on the shelves. And I started to get some different ideas about like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And a lot of these books mention improvisation, but don't go sort of deep in it. And when I got back off book tour, I actually decided I had a midlife crisis, let's be honest, total midlife crisis. I stepped down from my position at Second City as producer. And luckily the owner at the time knew I was unhireable. So he said, hey, why don't you take a year, we'll pay you, and you can either build a bridge out or a bridge in. And I was like, this is an incredible opportunity. So I got a new office, like right next to his in the front of Second City. I go on vacation, gonna come back and sort of figure out what my new world is. I'm in Michigan on vacation, and I get a text, your office is on fire. Now I work at Second City, so I'm just assuming that's not true until I got a phone call going, no, your office is on fire. So I don't know if Second City caught fire in 2016, and it directly went through my office. It was above a Mexican restaurant and destroyed pretty much everything. I have a couple of things over here that survived the fire, but that's it. So I got moved, Second City was saved, the stages, but my group, well, me, the owner, and then the corporate group, all got moved to temporary offices. So I'm in these temporary offices, and I'm now trying to figure out like, what is my job gonna be? And the guy who runs Second City Works, which is the corporate division, the group that brings this work into businesses all over the world, he says to me, well, you created a bunch of stuff when you were a producer. You did, like, I did mashups with like Hubbard Street Dance and Lyric Opera on the Toronto Symphony. He goes, who would you collaborate with if you were going to do work with us? And I thought back to those bookstore visits. And one of the things that I noticed was there was a lot of books on the art of negotiation. And so I was like, hey, what if we found an academic who was an expert in negotiation, and we created a course with them using improv? And I remembered that Dan Pink, who I know was a lawyer, and he loves improv and thinks it's really valuable, and talked about it as a lawyer using it in negotiation. So Steve, my boss, says, that's great, go do it. So I go to my computer and I Google academic negotiation Chicago, and the first 5 professors that come up, I email them. 4 of them get back to me right away. 3 of them like want to do it right away. So it's about a week later, and I'm about to finalize the deal with this professor at Loyola. I tell this story a lot, and I always feel bad about this woman because I ended up not working with her. Because the 5th professor from the University of Chicago, Eugene Crusoe, he emailed me. He's like, hey, sorry I didn't get back to you. Are you still interested in talking? So old Kelly would have blown this off because I had my bird in hand, but I'm going through this Shonda Rhimes year of yes bullshit in my life. So I'm like, yes, I'm open to the experience. I'll come meet with you. Because Graham, I'm gonna invite my wife, Heather. I think she'd be interested. So I tool over to the campus at the University of Chicago. I go into their office, and Eugene could care less what I'm talking about. I'm doing my rap on improv, but Heather is locked in. And when I finish, she goes, Kelly, we're both behavioral scientists. We have decades and decades of research that show us that people make terrible decisions for themselves. You have an art form and a practice that will allow them to make better decisions for themselves. Those 2 things have never been put together before. Her boss at the time was Richard Thaler, the Nobel Prize winning economist. He greenlit the Second Science Project, which is a program that Piero worked on, which looks at behavioral science through the lens of improvisation, and improvisation through the lens of science. And so what I'm going to do is pass it over to Piero, because one of the first things we've mentioned, yes and, right, the title of my book, on one of the very first sessions with these scholars was they said, can you teach us an exercise which is sort of your core exercise that people, and then we can look and see if there's some science around why it's effective or why it works. Piero, I'm going to toss to you.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Super excited to be here. Yeah, like Kelly mentions, improv is experiential, so we are going to put you through an experience. So this is your opportunity to turn your cameras on or to get ready to turn your cameras on, because it will be more of an immersive, fun experience for you if you are able to see each other. You're about to be sent into some breakouts to run this exercise together with a few other people. Depending on the numbers, I think it's probably going to end up being somewhere around 4 to 5 people per breakout. And again, if you can turn your cameras on, please do. Either way, you'll be unmuting and talking to each other in these breakouts. And here's what you're about to do. Very simple, straightforward exercise here. In these breakouts, you'll start by deciding. 5 people just left the meeting. Oh, there goes one of our breakouts. You'll start by deciding in these breakouts who is person A, B, C, D, and so on, just so that you have an order that you'll be going in. You'll always go in that order, A, B, C, D, however many people there are, back to A. And you'll always keep contributing in that order and always, again, circling back to A whenever you've gotten through everybody. In this first round, you'll go in, you'll quickly decide that order, and then person A is going to start by suggesting an idea for a vacation that everyone's going to take post-pandemic. A couple quick guidelines here. There are no budgetary constraints to this vacation, so you have unlimited budget. You're welcome to go wherever you'd like to go, do whatever you'd like to do. And also you are not constrained by the laws of time and space. So if you'd like to go back to the past, visit an era that you would like to go to, or in the future, if you'd like to have a party on the moon, wherever you'd like to take this vacation, you are welcome to do so. Person A, you are going to suggest these ideas to your group. Everyone else in this breakout is going to respond to all of these ideas with no, because, and a reason why. Okay, so no, because, and a reason why. Person A will suggest an idea. B will say no, because, and a reason why. C will say no, because, a reason why to person A's idea. D will do the same, and so on and so forth. Person A, when it comes back to you, you are welcome to react however you like. However, you must continue to contribute ideas in an effort to plan this vacation. Everyone else will respond with no, because. Let me pause and see if there are any questions. Go ahead and put those in the chat if you have any. Okay, great. So sure, I'll review it one more time. Yes, absolutely. Yes, many different vacations if you like. Really, it's totally up to you. But person A is going to suggest ideas. Everyone else is going to say no, because, and a reason why. So decide on an order, A, B, C, D, and so forth in these breakouts. Person A will suggest an idea for a vacation or something you can do. B, C, D, everyone else is going to respond with no, because in this initial round, in this first round. Decide an order and then jump in with A suggesting ideas and everyone else saying no, because to those ideas. All right. Please, person A especially, please remember this experience. We're going to come back and talk about it in just a moment. And you're only in these breakouts for a few minutes, so jump right in, decide that order, and then person A, get ready to pitch that idea, and everyone else get ready to say no, because, and a reason why.
And folks, just so you know, I put in chat what Piero just said, because you can pull up your chat even when you're in the breakout room, so you'll be able to see the instructions if you missed it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. All right, on your mark, get set. To the breakouts. All right, welcome back, folks. People starting to come back in. Welcome back from these breakouts. Welcome back. I'm seeing some smiling faces. I'm glad it wasn't too terribly painful on people. This is great.
We don't know
Awesome. We don't know. We don't know the cause of those smiles. That's a good point. Okay, great. So as people are coming back in, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Folks are coming back in to the main session. Fantastic. So we are going to talk about that experience. So just have an internal reflection about that experience, both what it was like to hear and say no. So for person A, you're going to be a pivotal figure in this exercise, because we are going to send you now back into these same breakouts one more time. Same setup. Person A, you're going to suggest ideas for this vacation, for this trip you're going to take. In this round, person A is going to start, and you're going to suggest these ideas. In this round, person B, C, D, and so on, you all are all going to respond with yes, and you're going to add something. So you'll say yes, and you're going to add something to that idea. You'll keep going in a circle. So person A will say yes to the idea. Person B will say yes, and they'll add something to the idea. Person C will do the same, and so on and so forth. Person A, when it comes back to you, you're going to keep contributing ideas in the same way. Everyone will keep yes-anding around the circle. Again, starting with A, you don't have to stick to the same vacation. You can start a brand new one. Same principles are in place. No budgetary constraints, no constraints based on the laws of physics. And we're going to compare these two rounds for you, compare some of the experiences within these two rounds. Any questions before we jump into these breakouts? All right, you're off on round 2. This is our yes and round. And welcome back, everyone else who's coming back to us at the moment. I'm seeing all these rooms close and people returning. Fantastic. Okay, welcome back. So now we've had 2 rounds. Person A, thank you for taking the leap for us and being our starting point. In particular, so I would love to hear from everybody in that chat. What was your experience comparing round 1 to round 2? What did you start to notice was different in round 2 versus round 1? It's a stirring experience. Thank you, Bridget. That's awesome. Let me see by a show of hands, just visually, where are my person A's? Who is person A in their group? Awesome. If you would be comfortable, I would love for a few person A's to digitally raise your hand so you come right to the top of my screen and unmute and share what your experience was. Let's start with that no round. So what was your experience receiving no to all of your suggestions? Tao, if you're comfortable, you were the first person to raise your hand. I'll call on you first. What was your experience receiving no to all of your ideas in that first round?
It was, even though I knew it was a game, it was surprisingly stressful. Like the entire goal was for everyone to reject every single word I said.
Right.
It doesn't matter that it's game. It's still rejection.
Right.
It's still rejection.
It still has that same emotional toll, right? Exactly. What was the difference for you when we entered into round 2 there, when your ideas were, people responded with yes and?
Everyone was happier.
Yeah.
Like, not just me, but everyone was finally like, yes, this is a much better mood. And now I'm going to talk about how that idea of yours was actually a really good idea. And there's this other stuff we could get. So while in the first round, it was like, oh, so how can I get as far away from all of these ideas? Because none of them are quite right. In the second round, like everything was terrific. And by the end, we were sitting in someone's yard in France, eating salad from their garden.
Perfect.
I love that. I love that. Terrific. Let me just take maybe one more person. Anyone want to physically raise your hand? I'll call on you. Michael, yeah, what was your experience in that in person A?
Yeah, so I found that the no's were actually faster than the yeses. People tended to think a little bit harder than on the yeses than on the no's, because I would be like, oh, I want to go to like Jordan, and it's like bam, bam, bam.
Yes. Yes.
You know, so you can really get the negative attention much faster than you can get the positive reaction.
And what was that effect on your idea generation as the person who kept receiving no?
I feel like when it's like faster, it just was like, oh, you get a little bit more retractive.
Yeah,
but when it's just kind of slower, you're just kind of like hanging in the air, like, let's go to Paris. And you're like,
yeah, that's awesome. Okay, great. Well, so again, and just for the sake of time, thank you so much to all our person A's for volunteering and for being the sort of the representative in each group. I love these comments that are coming in the chat, and I want to address some of them real quick. So this idea of a lot of people have sort of weighed in with round 2 being more fun or easier, and I think that's really valid. I think in many cases that's the case. And there's also this thing of there's some work to be done in round 2. You actually do have to, I also saw in the chat this idea of like you have to sort of work harder to avoid criticism. You have to work harder to sort of look for the positive in ideas versus the negative. And also I'll highlight Dan's comment here, which is this idea that like staying on the same thread rather than jumping to a new topic. And yes, so there's this idea of, I love this point that was made by Michael. Momentum is a really key factor here, right? Which is to say, no is easy to say, but it doesn't have a lot of momentum beyond it, right? So when you have a room full of people who are saying no, it's easy for all those people to say no. And then it starts becoming harder and harder and harder and harder. The longer we go in no, the more things slow down. And there's a direct parallel in real life. We are not saying that to never say no. Actually, no is a really valuable, healthy thing to say. It sets appropriate boundaries. And in real life, those boundaries are really important. You know, mom, can I go run in the street? Well, no is the right answer to that question, right? There's a time and place where no is absolutely appropriate. What we want to acknowledge, though, is that yes and no have repercussions. And typically, no, the repercussions of no is that it ultimately slows idea generation. It can bring things more to a standstill, which oftentimes is appropriate because it slows us down to keep us safe. With yes and, you may have found the opposite effect. So again, going back to Michael's point, while you're maybe taking more time in each of those answers is leading to more acceleration of the whole process itself. Those ideas are flowing. There's less sort of judgment in the room. I'm not guarded about the ideas I'm putting out there. You're less guarded about the ideas you're putting out there. It does require relinquishing some control over where you think this is going to go. So that's sort of the trade-off there. But if you can commit to that, yes and accelerates, and that acceleration can sometimes be scary. It can put us in a place of, whoa, this is going too fast. Let's slow it down. In our world, what's really important is that the scene always has to move forward, because if the scene stops moving forward, we lose our audience. They lose interest in what we're doing, and we've totally lost them. So for us, no is what we would call poison to our scenes, because it slows us down. It brings things to a halt. And yes and is really the cornerstone because of that acceleration aspect. We always have to be looking forward, moving forward, seeking opportunity. The other thing that you may notice is that no often invokes a fight or flight response, right? It's this idea of, I'm either going to, when I keep hearing no, especially again and again and again, maybe I can respond to it once. But if I hear no again and again and again, multiple times, if I'm in an environment of no, I tend to shut down. I either tend to start giving up on my ideas, or I dig my heels and I say, my ideas are good, but you're not going to support them. And so I'm going to sort of fight for my ideas. And that also means that I'm probably going to fight you on your ideas by default, because I see you sort of in this adversarial role. Yes and for us becomes really vital to collaboration. It is this idea of, we describe it as bring a brick, not a cathedral, which means you're going to bring an idea, I'm going to bring an idea, you're going to bring an idea, and I'm going to bring an idea. And we're going to build this thing little by little by little together, relinquishing some of that control of where this is going to go, because we know that the end product is going to benefit from that process. But we also recognize that in real life, we have a luxury on stage that doesn't exist in real life, and that I can on stage agree to a reality. If you say to me, let's jump out of a plane without a parachute, I can say yes to that idea, and I will still walk away from that scene. In the real world, that's not always the case. Again, like we mentioned, these boundaries of no become really important. So we have to get to this underlying idea of yes and as a philosophy rather than a phrase. The yes and philosophy does not necessarily equate to agreement. It does not mean that I have to agree with your idea or that I have to go along. What it means is, how am I entering into that conversation? Am I entering into that conversation with an open mindset, ready to hear ideas, ready to work to better understand you, and then respond and add my piece? Great, that's a yes and philosophy. But even if I'm saying the words yes and I don't mean them, if I'm saying them insincerely, that's still creating that sort of no environment that can be really, really challenging. And let me throw back to Kelly to talk a little bit about sort of where we've gone with that in the Second Science Project.
Yeah, so what's interesting about when we did that exercise for these scholars, immediately Richard Thaler is like, well, this is behavioral economics. We understand that people's default position is to say no or do nothing. And yes and is essentially a nudge to move people in the opposite direction, to also create from abundance. And that is key to our work. So then the question was posited. Okay, what happens when you have a central disagreement where you can't yes and? What is so when we do this exercise, broadly speaking, we do the no, we do like a yes but, and then we do a yes and. So what's the fourth? And they went away and looked at research, and we sort of got together on our end, and we came up with this idea of thank you because. Piero, do you want me to talk it through, or do you want to do it?
Well, I'll say a quick thing. I'll throw it back to you, Kelly, because I would just want to address this question that Mara posed in the chat, which I think is a really good one. Great point about relinquishing control. That takes trust. Any pointers on that? And I think actually that ties very directly to this idea of gratitude for information. In that, in order to relinquish that control, I have to be focused on something other than the outcome. Because if I'm focused on the outcome, ultimately there is only one outcome, right? In any given situation, when we talk about it, when we take action, there is a single outcome that emerges. So if our conversation is only ever focused on the outcome, it really sets us up to have what I would describe as a zero-sum game, where either I get my way or you get your way. But if you focus on interests rather than outcomes, if you focus on what matters to me about the outcome and what matters to you about the outcome, it opens up the door to finding an outcome that actually solves for both of those things. And so this idea of gratitude is central to finding those outcomes, finding those positive some results where we both get to sort of solve for the thing that's important to us. Kelly, let me throw back to you.
Yeah, and so thank you because becomes that. And in practice, when we have people find something benign that they disagree about, like chunky peanut butter versus smooth peanut butter. And we have them practice this thank you because. So you thank the person for the information, which does set off the gratitude part of the brain. That the because becomes kind of central. You have to find some point of agreement that you can move the conversation forward. So I had this in real life happen to me when my daughter was ill. One of her best friend's parents are anti-vaxxers. And we wanted to maintain this relationship, but it was like, well, I can't yes and this. So what happens when I thank you because, which is I thanked them for sharing their information. And I found the link we had, which was we both cared for our children so much, we didn't want them to be hurt. And when both parties understood that, we were going to do what we felt was best and we could move forward. So they FaceTimed and they chatted. They weren't in person when she was sick. So and we've actually run this. There's a paper coming out next year. We've run this study thousands and thousands of times. And what's really interesting is the paper was supposed to be done this year, but we decided that we wanted to try this exercise when only one party said thank you because. So I'm curious, thinking about this, do you think people still stayed in conversations longer, felt they were more fruitful if only one party did it?
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat a lot of great stuff around the idea that we do live in a very much, especially the corporate world, is a very no world. And usually I would say you're not alone in saying that a lot of times it's not a direct no, it's this sort of more indirect yes, but, where we feel better about ourselves about saying no, but we're still saying no, right? So again, I'll bring us back to this idea that for us, especially, our art form is collaborative. There's no such thing as me winning the scene or you winning the scene. And in fact, if either of us have that attitude, typically the whole scene is lost because it's not a competition. It truly is one of the great examples of collaborative teamwork, of having an outcome that must solve for both the interests of both individuals. It's not the default. That's not at all the default, right? You really have to do some work at that. Sorry, Kel, go ahead.
No, I'm just seeing this thing that Andrew mentioned. Is there a stab you from the front way of doing this? I don't know that I have that, but I have a very quick story that I love to tell about this. And I got it from Sunil Gupta's book, Backable. And he talks about a primatologist by the name of George Shatter, who was working in the 1950s in Central Africa. He was the mentor to Dian Fossey, Gorillas in the Mist. And Shatter was amazing. He got closer to the gorillas. He got greater data. And at a conference, a woman raised their hand and said, how is it that you can do this when no one else of your peers can do it? And he goes, oh, it's because I don't carry a gun in my backpack. So this is such a great metaphor. It doesn't have to be right in front. We know the people who are carrying guns in their backpack, and we know the people who aren't. And so as Piero was talking about the mindset, that is the thing that is important. That is people will know when you approach with gratitude. One of the phrases I love is you need to replace blame with curiosity, When you replace blame with curiosity, you have an opportunity to make all sorts of co-discoveries, because we don't do this alone. And this is the mistake in business. The mistake in business around zero sum is somehow thinking that if like I need to win, when in fact you need everyone to be on the same page and working together in order to succeed. You need diverse amounts of voices. And I mean every kind of diverse voice, kind of voice. Heifetz at Harvard calls it being on the balcony and the dance floor. You need to look at all the whole, and that's very much an improv sensibility. And we have tons of these kinds of exercises that address just that.
I think I'll also quickly point out that the because part of thank you becomes because also is very, very important. And the reason for that is it is very easy in many of these cases to do lip service to an idea, whether you're talking about yes and or thank you. It's very easy to say that phrase and sort of treat it like, oh, I've inserted that person feels valued, they feel appreciated, right? I always am careful to distinguish between making someone feel appreciated and making sure that someone is appreciated. That distinction becomes very, very important, not because they don't feel, not because of the feeling factor. If people are appreciated, typically they also feel appreciated. But if you only focus on the idea of how other people feel, it can direct us into that sort of like manipulation tactic, right? That idea that it matters more how they feel than what is actually happening. And the because and thank you because forces me to do some work. It forces me to do the very tough introspection of what am I truly authentically grateful for in what the other person has said. That is, you will find if you try this out, not an immediate thing. You actually have to take some time to figure that out for yourself. And what is super exciting to me about this particular technique or exercise is when you do that, a lot of times you learn something more about yourself. That you learn about the underlying motivation for why you feel a certain way, so that you can bring that to your next conversation as well.
A lot of people are mentioning.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
We're kind of jumping to Q&A, I think, at this point, because there's so much in here. But a lot of people are mentioning how hard this is, and that businesses don't operate like that. It's like, yes, do you see the world we fucking live in right now? It's a goddamn mess because of that. And honestly, what we've discovered, and there's literature around this, is like it's very hard to tackle this at an individual level and at an institution-wide level. I like to focus on teams. And I think if you focus on teams, and the literature I've seen on this is that if you've got a good leader in your team, you're probably sticking with it, even when there's other dysfunctional teams around. So it's a very much, and we use the term ensemble at Second City. And the late, great Sheldon Patakin, who was an early artistic director here, used to point out that there's the phrase, your team is only as good as its weakest member. And what he used to say is, no, your team is only as good as its ability to compensate for its weakest member. Because at some point, we're going to be the weakest member, and we need the other person to sort of chime in and feel empowered to do so. And that's a very improv thing.
Yeah, agreed.
Right,
I think, we'd love to take some questions, I think, if there are any. I'm seeing a few in the chat. Feel free to go ahead and add more. In the meantime, I will speak to Andrews. Andrew says, so this is very interesting because we create the environments based on our culture and beliefs. How might we improve in the creation of these safe spaces for dialogue and positivity? So one thing I'll say to that is we work hard not to define them as safe spaces because we can't promise that they will be. We don't know what that space will be like. We describe them often as brave spaces, the idea where we're going to ask you to step a little bit outside your comfort zone. We're going to do everything in our power so that when you do that, you're in a sort of a learning space as opposed to a trauma space. But we must acknowledge that any element of the unknown involves some risk. And I think that is actually one way that you establish that trust, is by sort of acknowledging that the space that you're entering into is one where we don't have control over all those factors. Kel?
Yeah, so someone's asking about how you apply this into areas like inclusion and talking about race. That's kind of the foundational thing here. So as Piero knows, we created with Heather for the University of Chicago a bunch of their orientation programs that are all built upon really on that. And Heather right now is the Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at UCLA. And her approach to it is basically working from the knowledge that most DE&I training doesn't work because people immediately go to their shame brain and they push back. And so the way she phrases it, and I love it, is like, if we can just get individuals to realize they treat people differently and that has consequences, that gives us a baseline for potential growth and change. And so because we all share it, we all have these biases. I was literally in a conversation with a higher up at the AMA who started telling me about how all biases are bad. And like, they're biases, they're built in our brain. They're not bad and they're not good, they are. And so we think this work, and we do a lot of work in the inclusion space, because improvisation is all about speaking through difference, and asking questions and getting to know each other and being eternally curious and all those things. So I think there's great value. In fact, we're building a program with Duke Corporate Education on building inclusive teams, where they're bringing the evidence and we're bringing the improv training, and that's going to be like self-paced learning that people can do online. So coming out next year. All right, what else
Kelly,
you got, Piero?
I'm seeing a comment that you can sort of speak to in just a moment on psychological safety, the research done by Amy Edmondson.
Yep.
Before you jump to that, I'll address Alexandra's comment with this idea of like, moving into, sort of building on your comment, Kelly, of moving into these conversations. And also Paul's comment here, this idea of suggesting eliminating the but, everything before the but is BS, and changing it to and. So Paul, 100% agreed. One thing that I will add is that unfortunately, and is also not a magic spell. So we even sometimes hear people say, yes, and but, right? Where that's still not authentic yes, and. So the one thing that I would sort of encourage you to think about, changing your but to an and is wonderful. It's a great way to nudge you in the right direction. But if you're not then examining what follows, then you're probably not using yes and authentically. So this is not a matter of find replace, changing your but to and. This is a matter of, if I condition myself to say yes and instead of yes but, how does that affect the rest of the sentence? And if it's changing how you then respond, then chances are it is nudging you towards that yes and philosophy. But ultimately, what I would suggest is, if yes and fits the sentence, by all means, please use it to nudge your way towards that philosophy. If it doesn't fit, please, please, please don't use yes and verbally. Instead, use it internally. Use the yes to remind yourself, yes, listen more. The and to remind yourself, and it's my job to also contribute. It's my responsibility to contribute to this dialogue and to this conversation. If it fits verbally, great, but if it doesn't, use it internally. Don't try to ham-fist it in if it's not fitting. Kelly, thoughts on that comment on psychological safety?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to Amy about this, and her work's amazing, and indeed, improvisation. What we know about improvisers is they can't do their work effectively if they're operating in their fear brain, and so we have to create these psychologically safe environments in which they create. So one example of that from our theater is that when we go into process for creating a review. And that is basically 6 actors and a director with a stage manager and a musical director. That's the ensemble that we're talking about that's creating this review. Especially in the early stage, this is what we call the yes and stage, first 4 weeks. I'm not allowed to go in that room. I'm not allowed to watch rehearsals. I'm not allowed to come to the show. I'm not allowed to come to the improv set until the director sort of says, yep, here, invite you in. We're ready to show you some stuff. And in part, that's just like, don't put those eyes on them when they're in their creative space, which is a non-judgment space. As a boss, I'm a judge. And so they don't need judges at that time. They do later, and that absolutely happens. So early stage ideation is absolutely, that's yes and, that's psychologically safe, that's all that. And then when we move from creativity, non-judgment, to innovation, when we're making things, that's when we bring in judgment and other stuff. And we have to learn how to like pitch back and forth as we're developing. It's also Kahneman's system 1, system 2 is improv. That's what you're constantly doing when you're working without a script. What else we got in here, Piero?
Kelly, we've got a number of requests for book list recommendations for you while you're thinking about what to sort of throw to people. And there's also been a request for what's on your bookshelf behind you. I'll quickly address Ellen's point here of you've heard people say, I agree to disagree. And I think that's really an interesting one, because we actually hear that a lot, right? Oh, let's just agree to disagree, which often is the end of a conversation, right? We're gonna debate something a bunch. We're not gonna find any common ground, and then we're just gonna walk away by saying, let's just agree to disagree. Sometimes we need to be in that space. I'm not trying to suggest that like sometimes that's appropriate, but if you can shift the conversation to I want to better understand what it is we disagree about and what it is that we agree about. And actually, even more importantly, and this is the thing that is so not intuitive, but so super valuable, is I want to work to appreciate what is different about your perspective, what I don't relate to. I want to better understand it. I want to better see where you're coming from, because that allows for complementarity. So I'll give the example of, like, if I'm a language person, and and I don't get math, I don't get numbers, it's very easy for me to sort of distance myself from math people, right? I can basically be like, oh, I'm a words person. Here are all my words people. These people I understand. Great. Who I don't understand is all these math people. They seem like total weirdos to me. I can't figure out what makes them tick, and so I'm just gonna, like, agree to disagree. Math is not my thing. But if I can invest the work in trying to understand what people are passionate about in that way, now when it comes to a time where we have to work together, and whatever the task is requires a verbal component and a math component, now we have those two pieces of the puzzle. Versus if I've only spent time forming bonds with the people that are like me, that share sameness, typically there's a deficit. This goes back to Kelly's point of your ability to compensate for the weakest link. The real important insight in my mind here is that we gravitate towards sameness. And so we form these bonds very naturally with people that we are similar to, and along the lines of what we are similar to them about. You even hear politicians saying, like, we have more in common than we have that divides us. And that's great. We're not suggesting, like, please, by all means, please form bonds with people based on similarity, but also start to work that muscle of forming bonds with people over difference, over the fact that you and I are very different in this way. And I may not be passionate about the thing that you're passionate about in the same way that you are, but I have put in the work to understand, so when we have a conversation, so that I know why that is true for you. Kelly, let me throw back to you.
Kelly Leonard Book Club. Let's move to it. So the three books that are holding up my computer are Sherry Turkle's Reclaiming Conversation, Kahneman's Noise, his new book, and I'm thanked in it because I got to read and give notes on early chapters. And then Stanford's own Jennifer Aaker's Humor Seriously. My wife and I are in the origin story of that book, which is fun. All right, Mind Wise by Nick Utley. So Nick is the researcher that Piero and my wife Anne and our friend Jen all worked with, and is a lot of this stuff that we're talking about is grounded in his research. Seth Stevens-Davidovitz, Everybody Lies, is an incredible book about big data, new data, and what the internet can tell us about what we really are. And then a book that's not out yet, I just interviewed him I host a podcast called Getting to Yes And, please subscribe. It's called The Power of Us by Jay Van Bavel and Dominic Packer, which is about harnessing our shared identities to improve performance, increase cooperation, and promote social harmony. So it's all about how our identities are inherently social, and they're not fixed, and they change depending on what group we're with or what type of group we're in. Really fascinating book. I highly recommend it. So how much time we got left? Do we have time for another? We have like 3 minutes.
3 minutes. I'll respond to a few things here.
Humor seriously with the
yeah, sorry, Jeremy. Yeah, jump in. Feel free.
Do one more question, Piero, and then I'll wrap with a couple of closing remarks.
Sure, that sounds great. So I'll just quickly say there've been a couple questions here around this idea of, like, how do we train in doing this? Again, you can find little things in everyday life. One of the big things is be more others focused, whether that means being more curious, trying to learn more about people, working to remember people's names, right? Any of these little things that can help train your brain to be more open and be more in that space. And just to address Hillary's question here, sort of creating a container for difficult conversations, I would say that this thank you because idea is one of our central ideas there, is the idea that training people in this art of having a conversation where you are not looking to win the conversation. You're not looking to convince the other person. Your goal is actually to change yourself. Your goal is to better understand where that other person is coming from. That can help keep you in that difficult conversation. Jeremy?
Amazing. Can we all, let's put it in gallery view if you can, because Piero and Kelly, we want to do something that we try to do at the end of all these, and that's give fireworks applause. Can everybody please give fireworks applause to Piero and Kelly? Excellent. Thank you so much. It's been an amazingly illuminating. I just tweeted, I wish I had the bandwidth to live tweet this session because there's so many gems. I mean, you guys are incredible. And we thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us.